Captain Sarah Chun watched the dying Zephyrian ship tumble through the void, its hull torn open like a flower blooming in reverse. Emergency lights flickered weakly through the gaps in its armor, painting the darkness in desperate reds and yellows. The alien vessel was maybe half the size of her cargo freighter, but it carried the elegant curves that marked it as one of the Zephyrian exploration craft. "Captain, they're broadcasting on emergency frequencies," called out her communications officer, Lieutenant Brooks. It's pretty bad, ma'am." Sarah nodded grimly. The Zephyrians were known throughout this sector as peaceful traders and explorers. They had never bothered anyone, never taken sides in conflicts, never even raised their voices in the Galactic Council meetings. Seeing one of their ships torn apart like this meant something terrible had happened. "Put it through," she ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life, and a weak, musical voice filled the space. The Zephyrians communicated through a combination of tones and clicks that their translators could barely handle, but the desperation came through clearly. "This is Research Vessel Harmony's Edge. Critical damage. Life support failing. Please, anyone who can hear this, the destruction fleet has taken our homeworld. They're coming for everyone." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The destruction fleet was more myth than reality in most parts of the galaxy. Stories told by traders who had drunk too much in spaceport bars. Tales of ships that appeared without warning, wiped out entire colonies, and vanished back into the void. Most people thought they were just stories pirates told to scare honest folks. "Brooks, scan for other ships in the area," she ordered. "And give me a damage assessment on that Zephyrian vessel." Her tactical officer, Commander Hayes, looked up from his console. "Captain, the Harmony's Edge has maybe 6 hours of air left. Their engines are completely dead, and I'm reading massive structural damage. They're not going anywhere on their own." Sarah studied the ship on her main screen. The Morning Star was a cargo hauler, not a rescue vessel. She had a crew of 38 and was carrying medical supplies to the outer colonies. Taking on survivors would slow them down, use up resources they couldn't spare, and potentially put them in danger if this destruction fleet was real. But the Zephyrians had helped humanity more than once over the years. When the human colony on Kepler 442b had been hit by that plague outbreak, it was Zephyrian medical knowledge that saved thousands of lives. When human traders got lost in the Magellan Nebula, Zephyrian rescue ships always came looking. They were good people, and good people deserved help. "Hayes, plot an intercept course. Brooks, tell them we're coming to pick them up." The rescue took 4 hours of careful maneuvering. The Harmony's Edge was spinning slowly, and matching its rotation without damaging either ship required all of her pilot's skill. Sarah suited up personally to lead the boarding party, taking along Dr. Martinez and 3 of her best engineers. The inside of the Zephyrian ship was worse than the scans had shown. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows through corridors filled with floating debris. The air was thin and tasted of metal and fear. Sarah's team moved quickly through the ship, following the life signs their scanners detected. They found 7 survivors in what looked like the ship's medical bay. The Zephyrians were tall, graceful beings with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. 3 of them were badly injured, and all of them looked exhausted and terrified. The leader of the group introduced himself as Navigation Master Kelleth. His voice carried harmonics that made Sarah think of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. But underneath the beauty was a tremor of barely controlled panic. "Captain Chun of Earth Vessel," he said in carefully pronounced standard, "we are grateful beyond words for your assistance. But you must understand the danger. The destruction fleet, they destroyed our world. 18 billion of our people, gone in a matter of hours." Sarah felt the number hit her like a physical blow. 18 billion. The entire human population was barely 12 billion, spread across hundreds of worlds and stations. The idea of losing that many lives so quickly was almost impossible to process. "What do you mean, destroyed your world?" she asked quietly. Kelleth's harmonics took on a darker tone. They came without warning. 12 massive ships, each the size of a small moon. They surrounded our planet and began firing some kind of weapon we had never seen before. The surface began to crack. The oceans boiled away. The atmosphere ignited. Dr. Martinez spoke up. That's not possible. No known weapon could. Doctor, Keleth interrupted gently. I watched continents split apart. I saw our great cities fall into molten chasms. Our children's schools, our hospitals, our gardens where we grew food for the hungry worlds, all gone. One of the injured Zephyrians, a female with silver markings on her forehead, whispered something in their own language. Keleth nodded sadly and turned back to Sarah. Healer Yeneth says she managed to record some of the attack before we fled. She was documenting our moonflower colonies for the Botanical Council when the attack began. If you have projection equipment, she can show you. An hour later, Sarah and her senior staff gathered in the Morningstar's main conference room. The Zephyrian survivors sat quietly at one end of the table, their large eyes reflecting the soft light from the ship's emergency power systems. Healer Yeneth had connected her personal recording device to the ship's holographic projector. The image that appeared in the center of the table took Sarah's breath away. The Zephyrian homeworld had been beautiful beyond description. Crystal cities rose from emerald forests, connected by streams of flowing water that caught the light of their binary suns. Flying creatures that looked like living rainbows moved through skies so clear they seemed like windows into heaven itself. Then, the destruction fleet arrived. The ships were enormous, black as the void between stars, and covered in what looked like scars or battle damage from countless conflicts. They moved with a terrible purpose, spreading out around the planet in perfect formation. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The recording showed normal life continuing on the surface while those death-black ships hung in orbit like a necklace of nightmares. Then, the firing began. Sarah had seen weapons of war before. Humanity had fought its share of conflicts in the centuries since reaching for the stars. She had seen planets bombarded, cities reduced to rubble, forests burned to ash. But nothing had prepared her for this. The weapons these ships used didn't just destroy the surface. They reached down into the planet itself, cracking the crust like an eggshell. Molten rock fountained into the sky as tectonic plates shifted and broke. The beautiful crystal cities vanished in seconds, swallowed by chasms that opened beneath them like hungry mouths. But the worst part was the silence. The recording equipment couldn't capture sound through vacuum, so the death of an entire world happened without a scream, without even a whisper. 18 billion lives ended in perfect, terrible quiet, while those black ships watched like judges passing sentence on existence itself. When the recording ended, the conference room stayed silent for a long time. Finally, Commander Hayes cleared his throat. Captain, with respect, we need to get this information to Earth Command immediately. If these ships are real, if they can do what we just saw, they are moving through this sector systematically, Keleth said quietly. Our long-range sensors detected them attacking 2 other worlds before they reached us. The crystalline hives of Vega 7, the ocean cities of Aquatica Prime. All gone. Lieutenant Brooks looked up from her console. Captain, I've been monitoring communications across this sector. There's been complete radio silence from 17 systems over the past 6 months. Systems that used to broadcast constantly. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. 17 systems. How many billions of lives did that represent? How many civilizations had simply vanished while the galaxy went about its normal business, unaware that something was hunting in the darkness? Navigation Master Keleth, she said formally, on behalf of humanity and the United Earth Authority, I promise you that this information will reach our government. We will not let your people's sacrifice be forgotten. The Zephyrians' harmonics took on a note of gratitude mixed with sorrow. Captain Shun, your species has always been kind to us. But, you must understand, the destruction fleet is not something that can be fought with kindness. They are not pirates or conquerors. They are exterminators. They take nothing, demand nothing, negotiate for nothing. They simply erase life from the galaxy. Sarah stood up slowly. Maybe so, but humanity has a saying, Navigation Master. We never forget a favor, and we never forgive a wrong. Your people helped us when we needed it most. Now it's time to return that favor. The journey back to human space took 3 weeks. Sarah pushed the Morning Star harder than she had ever pushed a ship before, using every trick she knew to squeeze extra speed out of her engines. The Zephyrian survivors integrated well with her crew, sharing their knowledge of the destruction fleet and helping to repair systems with their advanced understanding of quantum mechanics. During those 3 weeks, more reports filtered in through the long-range communications network. The Verdant Collective, a peaceful alliance of agricultural worlds, had gone silent. The Mining Confederation of the Asteroid Belt reported that their outlying stations weren't responding to hails. Independent traders spoke of finding empty systems where thriving colonies should have been. But it was the message from the Altrurian embassy that made Sarah's blood run cold. The Altrurians were an ancient species, older than humanity by millions of years. They had evolved past the need for physical form long ago and existed as pure energy beings, observing the galaxy's younger races with benevolent interest. They rarely interfered in the affairs of corporeal species, but they occasionally offered guidance to civilizations they felt showed promise. The message was brief and carried the formal weight of a species that had watched stars being born. To all organic civilizations, the harvesters have returned. Evacuation of border systems recommended. Galactic Council emergency session convened. The cycle begins anew. Sarah read the message 3 times before its full implications sank in. The harvesters, not the destruction fleet, but the harvesters. That suggested this wasn't random violence or conquest. It suggested purpose, planning, and, worst of all, experience. When the Morning Star finally reached Earth space, Sarah was met by a full military escort. Admiral Chun, no relation, despite the shared name, came aboard personally, along with representatives from Earth Intelligence and the Xenological Research Division. The briefing took place in the ship's conference room, with Keleth and the other Zephyrian survivors giving their testimony, while human officers took notes and asked increasingly grim questions. When the recordings of the homeworld's destruction were played, several of the military personnel had to leave the room. Admiral Chun was a veteran of the Proximan War and had seen his share of destruction, but even he looked shaken by what the projector showed. Navigation Master Keleth, he said when the recording ended, you mentioned that your people's sensors detected the attack fleet's trajectory after they left your system. Do you know where they're headed next? Keleth's harmonics took on a note of regret. Yes, Admiral. They appear to be moving toward the Tau Ceti system. If their pattern holds, they will arrive there in approximately 8 months. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Tau Ceti was home to New Geneva, one of humanity's most important research colonies. It had a population of almost 1 billion people, and its universities housed some of the brightest minds in human space. It was also where her sister lived with her family. 8 months, Admiral Chen repeated. That's not much time to evacuate 1 billion people. Admiral, said Commander Hayes. With respect, evacuation might not be enough. Those ships destroyed an entire planet. Even if we get everyone off New Geneva, we lose the colony itself, the research stations, the infrastructure. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Navigation Master, you said these harvesters have done this before. Do you know anything about their past attacks? Keleth's eyes took on a distant look, as if he were accessing racial memories passed down through generations. There are stories among the oldest species. The Altrurians have mentioned them in passing, though they rarely speak of such dark things. According to the legends, the harvesters appear every few million years, sweeping through the galaxy and erasing advanced civilizations. They take nothing, leave nothing, and vanish back into the void until the cycle begins again. But why? Sarah asked. What could possibly motivate something like that? No one knows, Captain. Perhaps they see organic life as a contamination to be cleansed. Perhaps they are following programming from a long-dead creator species. Perhaps they simply enjoy destruction. The reason matters less than the result. Admiral Chin stood up slowly. Navigation Master Keleth, on behalf of the United Earth Authority, I want to formally request asylum for you and your people. We'll provide you with everything you need to rebuild your lives in human space. You are generous, Admiral, Keleth replied. But I must ask something in return. Do not let our children grow up in a galaxy where the harvesters rule unopposed. Find a way to fight them. Find a way to make them pay for what they have done. Sarah spoke up before the Admiral could respond. Navigation Master, I made you a promise 3 weeks ago. I said humanity never forgets a favor and never forgives a wrong. I meant every word. Over the following months, Sarah watched human space transform. The news of the Zephyrian genocide spread quickly despite government attempts to control information flow. Fear gripped the outer colonies as people realized that something was hunting civilizations and would eventually come for humanity. But fear, Sarah discovered, wasn't the only emotion her species was capable of feeling. As the months passed and preparations began in earnest, she saw something else emerging from the terror and uncertainty. She saw anger. The human government officially announced the Tau Ceti Defense Initiative, a massive mobilization of military and civilian resources to protect the system from attack. Publicly, it was described as a defensive operation designed to evacuate civilians and establish a strong perimeter to discourage the attackers. Privately, Sarah knew better. She had been reassigned to the military's Special Projects Division, where she spent her days working with teams of engineers, physicists, and xenobiologists to study every scrap of information about the harvesters. The project had another name in the classified briefings: Operation Payback. Humanity was going to fight, not just to defend Tau Ceti, but to hurt these monsters in return for the billions of lives they had taken. The Zephyrians were gentle people who had never raised a hand against anyone. The crystalline hives had been artists who created beauty from living crystal. The ocean cities of Aquatica Prime had been poets and philosophers who had spent centuries composing songs about the meaning of existence. All of them were gone now, erased from the galaxy by creatures that killed entire worlds for reasons no one understood. But humanity was not gentle poets or crystal artists. Humanity had been forged in the fires of a dozen different wars, shaped by millennia of conflict and survival against odds that should have destroyed them long ago. The Harvesters had made a mistake when they destroyed the Zephyrians. They had hurt humanity's friends, and humanity never forgot a favor. More importantly, they had revealed themselves to a species that had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to stop a monster was to become something even more dangerous. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed battle station orbiting Earth, watching the construction of the largest fleet in human history. Hundreds of ships filled the space around her, from massive dreadnoughts to tiny scout vessels, all bristling with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. In 8 months, those ships would meet the harvesters at Tau Ceti. The galaxy would learn whether humanity's reputation for stubborn determination was justified, or whether they would simply become another silent system on the list of the disappeared. But, as Sarah watched the fleet grow larger each day, as she saw the determination in the eyes of every human she met, she found herself almost feeling sorry for the harvesters. They had spent millions of years destroying civilizations that had never fought back, never resisted, never made them pay a price for their crimes. They were about to learn that humanity was different. They were about to discover what happened when someone hurt the friends of a species that held grudges for geological epochs and had turned warfare into an art form. The countdown to Tau Ceti had begun, and, with it, the countdown to revenge. The war room deep beneath Luna City hummed with the quiet intensity of organized desperation. Admiral Sarah Chun, recently promoted from her merchant marine days, stood before a holographic display showing the Tau Ceti system in perfect detail. 8 months of preparation had led to this moment, and every second counted now. Around the circular table sat representatives from every branch of human military and civilian authority. General Morrison from the Space Marines, Admiral Zhang from the Stellar Navy, Director Walsh from Intelligence, and a dozen others whose lives had been consumed by a single question: how do you fight something that destroys planets? The harvesters will arrive in 72 hours, Admiral Chen announced, manipulating the holographic display to show projected approach vectors. Our long-range sensors have confirmed 12 ships, exactly matching the force that destroyed the Zephyrian homeworld. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, chief of the Xenobiology Research Division, leaned forward. Admiral, we've had 8 months to study every piece of data about these creatures, and we still know almost nothing about them. No biological samples, no communication attempts, no survivors from any of their attacks except our Zephyrian friends. What we do know, interrupted Commander Hayes, now serving as Admiral Chen's tactical advisor, is that they're not invincible. The Altrurians indicated this has happened before, which means previous cycles ended somehow. Navigation Master Kelleth, The only non-human at the table rippled his harmonics in what Sarah had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a bitter laugh. The cycles ended when they ran out of civilizations to destroy, Commander. The galaxy became empty, and they vanished until new species evolved to take the place of the dead. The room fell silent at that. 8 months of preparation, and they were still essentially fighting blind against an enemy that had been perfecting genocide since before humanity's ancestors had learned to use fire. General Morrison cleared his throat. Admiral, what's the current status of the Tau Ceti evacuation? 93% complete, Sarah replied. We've moved 812 million civilians to secure systems. The remaining population consists of volunteers who chose to stay and help with the defense, plus essential personnel for Operation Payback. Director Walsh activated his own holographic display, showing a complex web of ship movements and supply lines. The defense fleet is in position. 418 combat vessels, including the new Retribution-class dreadnoughts. Every ship is equipped with the improved weapons systems we've developed based on Zephyrian energy theory. Dr. Reyes added, the energy weapons should be more effective against their shields than conventional projectiles. The Zephyrians gave us everything they learned about Harvester defensive systems during their homeworld's final battle. Sarah nodded, but privately she wondered if it would be enough. The Harvesters had destroyed 17 systems that they knew about, possibly many more. Whatever weapons and defenses they possessed had been tested against every major military force in this sector of the galaxy, and nothing had even slowed them down. There's something else, she said quietly. Intelligence has detected unusual quantum signatures from several uninhabited systems along the Harvester's projected route. Systems that were supposedly empty. Director Walsh's expression darkened. Admiral, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the 17 systems we know about might not be the complete list. The Harvesters may have been operating in this sector longer than we realized, systematically clearing out civilizations before moving on to the more prominent targets. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. If Sarah was right, the Harvesters weren't just destroyers of worlds. They were exterminators who had been quietly preparing this sector for total sterilization, clearing away the smaller populations before moving on to the major civilizations. Kelitha's harmonics took on a tone of deep sadness. Captain, Admiral Chan, my people had trade relationships with 47 different species in this sector. Over the past 2 years, 23 of them stopped responding to communications. We assumed it was political isolation or technological problems. 23, General Morrison repeated. That could represent billions more lives. Sarah felt the familiar rage building in her chest. The same anger that had sustained her through 8 months of preparation, 8 months of watching human space transform itself into a war machine dedicated to a single purpose, making the Harvesters pay for their crimes. Navigation Master Kelith, she said formally, I want you to know that every ship in our defense fleet carries a memorial plaque listing the names of every Zephyrian world, every crystalline hive, every civilization we know the Harvesters have destroyed. Our people will remember why we're fighting. The Zephyrians' large eyes reflected the soft light of the holographic displays. Admiral, your species honors us with such remembrance. But, please understand, we do not expect you to save us. We are gone. Our worlds are ash. Our people exist only in memory. Fight for yourselves, for your children, for the future of organic life in this galaxy. Commander Hayes spoke up. With respect, Navigation Master, that's not how humanity works. You helped us when we needed it. Your people saved human lives, shared your knowledge, opened trade routes that enriched our civilization. We don't abandon our friends just because the odds are bad. Sarah smiled grimly. Besides, the Harvesters made this personal when they hurt people under our protection. They're about to learn that humanity has a very specific policy regarding threats to our allies. The meeting continued for another 4 hours, covering logistics, tactical deployments, and contingency plans for scenarios ranging from complete victory to total evacuation. When it finally ended, Sarah found herself alone with Kelith in the observation lounge overlooking the lunar surface. You're afraid, the Zephyrian said quietly, his harmonics carrying notes of compassion. Terrified, Sarah admitted. We're about to fight something that has been destroying civilizations since before my species existed. I have no idea if our weapons will work, if our strategies will be effective, or if we'll even be able to hurt them before they wipe us out. Then, why fight at all? Why not evacuate completely and leave them nothing to destroy? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching Earth rise above the lunar horizon. The blue and white marble that had given birth to her species looked so peaceful from this distance, so vulnerable. Because someone has to, she finally said. Because if we don't try, if we just run and hide, then every civilization that comes after us will face the same choice. Eventually, someone has to make a stand. Eventually, someone has to hurt them enough that they think twice before continuing their genocide. And if you fail, then we fail. But we'll fail fighting, and maybe the next species to try will learn something from our mistakes. Maybe they'll be the ones to finally stop this cycle. Kelitha's harmonics took on a note of admiration mixed with sorrow. Your species is remarkable, Admiral. In all my travels, I have never encountered another civilization that would choose certain death over abandoning their principles. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. You haven't been paying attention to human history, Navigation Master. We're probably the most stubborn species in the galaxy. We've been fighting hopeless battles against impossible odds since we learned to pick up rocks and throw them at larger predators. It's what we do. 2 days later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. Around her, the defense fleet waited in perfect formation, 418 ships arranged in overlapping fields of fire around the Tau Ceti system. The plan was simple in concept, horrifically complex in execution. When the harvesters arrived, they would find what appeared to be a standard defensive formation protecting the inhabited worlds. The fleet would engage them conventionally, forcing them to reveal their capabilities and tactics while the real trap was prepared. Hidden throughout the system were the components of Operation Payback: massive fusion bombs disguised as asteroid miners, quantum torpedo launchers built into seemingly abandoned space stations, and the crown jewel of human engineering, the Sunbreaker Array. The Sunbreaker was humanity's attempt to level the playing field. If the harvesters could destroy planets, then humanity would give them a taste of stellar-level destruction. The array consisted of 12 orbital platforms positioned around Tau Ceti's star, each one capable of focusing and redirecting massive amounts of stellar energy. In theory, they could turn the system's sun into a weapon. In practice, they had never been tested at full power, and the computer models suggested a 30% chance that activating the array would destabilize the star enough to cause a supernova. Sarah had approved the project anyway. If they were going to die, they would take the harvesters with them. Admiral, called out Lieutenant Brooks from the communications station, we're receiving a priority transmission from the outer sensor network. The harvesters have entered the system. Sarah felt her heart rate increase despite months of preparation. Put the fleet on high alert. All ships to battle stations. And broadcast the message to every vessel in the fleet. The message was simple, recorded by Sarah herself just hours earlier. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Authority. To every human serving in this fleet, remember why we are here. Behind us lie the worlds where our children sleep, where our parents grew old, where our civilization has built wonders that took centuries to create. Ahead of us are the creatures that destroyed 18 billion Zephyrian lives, that murdered entire civilizations while the galaxy slept. Today we teach them that humanity remembers its debts. Today we show them that some species fight back. If we die here, we die as free beings defending everything we love. If we live as the generation that broke a cycle of genocide millions of years in the making. All ships, prepare for battle. Make them pay for every light year of space, every minute of time, every drop of blood. Show them what it means to threaten the friends of Earth. The Harvester fleet appeared on the main screen like a constellation of nightmares. 12 ships, each one the size of a small moon, black as the void between galaxies, and covered in the same scars and battle damage that the Zephyrian recordings had shown. They moved with the terrible purpose of predators who had never known defeat. Admiral, reported Commander Hayes from the tactical station, they're maintaining their standard formation. No response to our hails or challenges. They're heading directly for the inhabited worlds, exactly as predicted. Sarah nodded. The harvesters had repeated the same pattern in every system they had attacked. Arrive, spread out, ignore all communication attempts, and begin the systematic destruction of every world capable of supporting life. They were methodical, patient, and utterly without mercy. All ships, execute attack pattern Alpha, target the lead vessels, and hit them with everything we have. Let's see how they respond to a real fight. The human fleet opened fire as one, 418 ships unleashing a coordinated barrage of energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and exotic matter torpedoes. The space between the two fleets lit up like a newborn star as thousands of weapon systems fired simultaneously. The harvesters' response was immediate and terrifying. Defensive shields flared to life around each ship, absorbing the human weapons' fire with casual ease. Return fire came in the form of the same planet-cracking energy beams that had destroyed the Zephyrian homeworld, but focused into ship-killing lances of destruction. The UES Defiance, one of humanity's newest cruisers, took a direct hit from the nearest harvester. The beam punched through her shields, armor, and hull like they were paper, vaporizing a third of the ship in a fraction of a second. The remaining crew had just enough time to broadcast their final status report before a secondary explosion consumed the rest of the vessel. 214 souls, Sarah whispered, watching the expanding cloud of debris that had once been a ship full of human beings. Add them to the list. The battle continued for 6 hours, with the human fleet using every tactical advantage they could devise. They fought in scattered formations to avoid concentrated fire. They used the system's asteroid belts and gas giant rings for cover. They coordinated attacks to overwhelm individual harvester shields while supporting vessels provided covering fire. Nothing worked. The harvesters fought with the efficiency of machines and the patience of immortals. They absorbed every tactic humanity could devise, adapted to every strategy, and continued their methodical advance toward the inhabited worlds. 67 human ships had been destroyed, and they had not managed to inflict meaningful damage on a single harvester vessel. But Sarah was not discouraged. The conventional battle had never been intended to win the war. It was meant to gather intelligence, force the harvesters to reveal their capabilities, and position them for the real attack. All ships, execute withdrawal plan Gamma, she ordered. Fall back to the inner system, and prepare for Phase 2. As the surviving human fleet retreated in apparent defeat, the harvesters continued their advance. They spread out in their standard formation, surrounding the inhabited worlds in preparation for their ritual of extermination. Their weapons began to charge, building up the massive energies needed to crack a planet's crust. That was when Sarah activated Operation Payback. The fusion bombs hidden throughout the system detonated simultaneously, not as weapons aimed at the harvester ships, but as triggers for the quantum torpedo launchers. The explosions created temporary wormholes that allowed the torpedo platforms to fire from impossible angles, bypassing the harvesters' forward shields and striking their hulls directly. For the first time in millions of years, harvester blood was shed in battle. 3 of the 12 ships took critical damage from the quantum torpedo strikes. Their hulls cracked, atmosphere vented into space, and internal explosions lit up their interiors like jack-o'-lanterns. But, even wounded, they continued to fight, their weapons systems still charging for the planetary bombardment. Admiral, Hayes called out, the damaged ships are still operational. Their weapons are at 80% charge and rising. Sarah nodded grimly. She had hoped the torpedo strikes would disable more of the enemy ships, but 3 out of 12 was better than nothing. Now came the moment of truth. All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance. Activate the Sunbreaker Array. The 12 orbital platforms surrounding Tau Ceti's star had been charging for hours, building up massive electromagnetic fields and quantum resonance chambers. Now they synchronized their operations, creating a focused beam of stellar energy that made every human weapon look like a child's toy by comparison. The beam struck the center of the harvester formation with the concentrated fury of a star. Space itself seemed to scream as exotic matter met exotic matter, as technologies millions of years old collided with human desperation given physical form. 2 more harvester ships died in that initial strike. consumed by energies that rewrote the laws of physics in a sphere of space 10,000 kilometers across. But the remaining 7 ships adapted quickly, spreading out to avoid concentrated fire and launching their own counterattack against the Sunbreaker platforms. The battle for Tau Ceti became a slugging match between gods and upstart mortals, with neither side willing to give ground. The harvesters poured fire into the human positions, destroying defense platforms, orbital stations, and any ship that stayed in one place too long. The Sunbreaker array continued to fire, each shot consuming years of solar output in seconds, each beam capable of sterilizing entire worlds. For 12 hours, the battle raged across the system. The space around Tau Ceti became a graveyard of shattered ships, destroyed platforms, and the broken dreams of 2 civilizations locked in mortal combat. But, slowly, inevitably, humanity began to lose. The harvesters were simply too powerful, too experienced, too well-equipped for this kind of warfare. They had been perfecting the art of genocide for millions of years while humanity had been learning to fight wars between tribes with stone weapons. One by one, the Sunbreaker platforms fell to harvester fire. The human fleet was reduced to fewer than 100 ships, most of them damaged and running low on ammunition. The harvesters had lost 5 of their 12 vessels, but the remaining 7 were more than enough to complete their mission. As the last Sunbreaker platform exploded in a ball of superheated plasma, Sarah realized that humanity was about to lose its first and probably last battle against the galaxy's ultimate predators. But they had not lost without cost. 5 harvester ships destroyed. Millions of years of invincibility shattered. For the first time in their long history of destruction, the harvesters had bled. All ships, Sarah broadcast to the surviving fleet, prepare for ramming attacks. If we're going to die, we're taking as many of them with us as possible. Show them what it means to fight humans. The silence that followed Admiral Chen's ramming order lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, every human ship in the system responded at once, their engines roaring to life as they accelerated toward the remaining harvester vessels with the desperate fury of a species that had nothing left to lose. But before the first ramming ship could reach its target, something unprecedented happened. The harvester fleet stopped fighting. Admiral, Lieutenant Brooks called out from her communications station, her voice filled with disbelief. The harvester ships are powering down their weapons. They're broadcasting something. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. In 8 months of preparation, in all the intelligence gathered from the Zephyrians and the Altrurians, there had never been any record of the harvesters communicating with their victims. They arrived, they destroyed, they left. Communication was not part of their pattern. Put it through, she ordered, signaling for the ramming ships to hold position. The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It spoke in perfect standard, but underneath the familiar words was something alien beyond description. Harmonics that hurt to listen to, frequencies that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the brain. Species designation: human. You have caused unexpected casualties in defense of inferior genetic material. This deviation from predicted behavioral patterns requires explanation. Sarah exchanged glances with Commander Hayes, seeing her own shock reflected in his eyes. The harvesters were not only talking, they were asking questions. After millions of years of silent genocide, something had made them curious. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Authority," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We are defending our allies and our territory against unprovoked aggression. The only explanation you'll get from us is this: withdraw from this system immediately, or we will continue fighting until every ship on both sides is destroyed." The response came immediately, carrying notes of what might have been amusement if such emotions could exist in something so alien. Species designation: human. Your allies designation: Zephyrian. Genetic viability assessment: minimal. Technological advancement level: primitive. Strategic value: negligible. Query: why do you sacrifice superior genetic material to defend inferior specimens? Sarah felt her anger building again, the same rage that had sustained her through 8 months of preparation and 12 hours of desperate battle. But underneath the anger was something else, something that made her pause before responding. The harvesters were confused. For the first time in their millions of years of existence, they had encountered something that didn't fit their understanding of how the galaxy worked. They were asking questions because their entire worldview had been challenged by humanity's refusal to abandon their friends. Because that's what friends do, she said simply. The Zephyrians helped us when we needed it. They saved human lives, shared their knowledge, opened their worlds to our people. When someone hurts our friends, we hurt them back. There was a long pause before the harvester voice returned, and this time it carried undertones that Sarah couldn't identify. Curiosity, perhaps, or something that might have been confusion in a mind capable of such emotions. Concept, friendship. Definition, unclear. Genetic material designated, human. Survival probability with withdrawal, high. Survival probability with continued conflict, 0. Logical choice, withdrawal. Query. Why do you choose 0 survival probability to defend negligible strategic assets? Commander Hayes leaned forward. Admiral, they're trying to understand us. They literally don't comprehend why we would risk everything for people who can't help us win. Sarah nodded slowly. The harvesters had spent millions of years destroying civilizations that either couldn't fight back or fought only for their own survival. They had never encountered a species that would face extinction to defend someone else. Because some things are more important than survival, she said, addressing the alien voice. Because a universe where we abandoned our friends to save ourselves would be a universe not worth living in. Because if we let you destroy everyone we care about, then what's the point of continuing to exist? Another pause, longer this time. When the harvester voice returned, it carried new harmonics, frequencies that suggested deep internal processing. Concept, honor. Concept, loyalty. Concept, sacrifice for non-survival goals. These behavioral patterns exist in archived data from previous cycles. Species designation, untranslatable. Species designation, untranslatable. Species designation, untranslatable. All extinct. All fought for non-survival concepts. All failed to prevent harvesting operations. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The harvesters had encountered species like humanity before. Civilizations that fought for their friends, that chose death over dishonor, that refused to abandon their principles even when facing extinction. And all of them had been destroyed. But then, the alien voice continued, and something in its tone had changed. However, previous species fought for non-survival concepts using traditional tactical frameworks. Species designation. Human used non-traditional tactics. Planet-killing energy levels directed against harvesting fleet. 5 harvesting vessels destroyed. This outcome unprecedented in recorded history. Navigation Master Keleth's voice came over the communication system from his position aboard the US Harmony, one of the surviving human vessels. His harmonics carried notes of amazement and hope. Admiral, I don't think they've ever been hurt before. In millions of years of destroying civilizations, we're the first species to actually make them bleed. The harvester voice returned before Sarah could respond. Clarification required. Species designation, human. Current tactical philosophy. Fight until extinction to defend allies. Predicted outcome, mutual destruction. Acceptable outcome for human tactical philosophy, mutual destruction. Query, is this assessment accurate? Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. Young men and women who had volunteered for a mission they knew would probably kill them. People who could have evacuated with the civilians, but chose to stay and fight for the memory of 18 billion Zephyrians they had never met. Yes, she said quietly. If the choice is between abandoning our friends and dying together, we choose to die together. Every time. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 5 minutes. Sarah could hear the hum of her ship's engines, the whisper of life support systems, the quiet breathing of her crew as they waited to learn whether they would live or die based on her words. When the harvester voice returned, it carried something that might have been respect. Species designation, human. Tactical assessment complete. Threat level, unprecedented. Previous assessment, minimal technological threat, standard behavioral patterns. Revised assessment, willing to choose mutual destruction over defeat. Capable of inflicting significant casualties. Tactical philosophy incompatible with harvesting efficiency protocols. Admiral Chen felt her heart start to race. What does that mean? It means, the alien voice replied, that harvesting operations in this sector will be postponed pending full analysis of human tactical capabilities and behavioral patterns. Withdrawal from current operational area authorized. The 7 remaining harvester ships began to move, their massive hulks turning away from the human fleet and the worlds they had come to destroy. But before they departed, the alien voice spoke one more time. Species designation: human. Previous cycle termination required elimination of all advanced civilizations. Current cycle parameters under review. Your tactical philosophy has introduced new variables into operational planning. Recommendation: develop defensive capabilities. Harvesting operations will resume when tactical solutions to human behavioral patterns have been identified. The harvester fleet accelerated toward the edge of the system, their dark ships disappearing into hyperspace with the same terrible efficiency that had brought them. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind only the wreckage of the most destructive battle in human history. Saracen stood on her bridge in complete silence for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. They had not won. The harvesters were not defeated, not destroyed, not even significantly damaged by human standards. They had simply decided that humanity represented a new kind of problem, one that required further study before they could be efficiently eliminated. But, for the first time in millions of years, a harvester fleet had withdrawn without completing its mission. For the first time in the recorded history of the galaxy, the exterminators had blinked. "Admiral," Commander Hayes said quietly, "what do we do now?" Sarah looked out at the wreckage floating around Tau Ceti, the debris of ships and platforms, and the dreams of peace that had died in the last 12 hours. 147 human vessels had been destroyed. Almost 30,000 people had died defending a system that most of them had never visited before today. But the harvesters were gone. The worlds of Tau Ceti still orbited their star. The children sleeping in their beds on New Geneva would wake up tomorrow morning to see another sunrise. "Now we prepare," she said firmly. "The harvesters said they would return when they figured out how to deal with us. That gives us time to get ready for them." Over the following months, the news of humanity's confrontation with the harvesters spread throughout the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and profound. Species that had been preparing for evacuation or hiding in the deepest reaches of space suddenly found new hope. The Altrurians, ancient and wise, sent a delegation to Earth with an offer of technological assistance. The surviving crystalline hives emerged from their hidden refuges to share their knowledge of defensive systems. Even the mysterious void dancers, who had not been seen in this galaxy for centuries, sent cryptic messages indicating their interest in the small species that made the devourers pause. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the Battle of Tau Ceti, a massive space station appeared in Earth orbit without warning. It was clearly of alien origin, but unlike anything in the known databases of human xenobiology. The beings who emerged from the station called themselves the Remnants. They were the last survivors of a civilization that had faced the harvesters in a previous cycle, millions of years ago. They had survived by hiding in the empty spaces between galaxies, watching and waiting for someone to finally stand up to their destroyers. "We have observed many species face the harvesters over the millennia," their leader explained during the first meeting with Earth authorities. "Some fought bravely. Some tried to hide. Some attempted to negotiate. All failed because they fought as individuals, each species defending only itself." Sarah, now promoted to overall commander of Earth's defense forces, listened carefully to every word. "But you have done something different," the remnant continued. "You fought not for yourselves alone, but for allies who could not help you win. You chose mutual destruction over abandoning your principles. This confused them, disrupted their operational parameters. Will it be enough when they return?" Sarah asked. "No," the remnant replied honestly. "They will adapt. They will develop new tactics to counter your behavioral patterns. They will return stronger and more prepared than before." Sarah felt her heart sink. But the alien continued speaking. "However, you have given us something we have not had in millions of years. You have given us time and hope, and, most importantly, you have given us allies. The galaxy is waking up, Admiral Chun." Species that have hidden for millennia are emerging. Technologies that were thought lost are being recovered. The harvesters face not just humanity now, but a coalition of every surviving civilization that has learned from your example. Over the next 2 years, that coalition grew beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The Tau Ceti Defense Initiative expanded into the Galactic Defense Alliance, encompassing hundreds of species across dozens of sectors. Ancient weapons were rebuilt, new technologies were developed, and, for the first time since the cycle began, the galaxy's civilizations worked together with a single goal: making the harvesters pay for millions of years of genocide. Sarah Chun found herself commanding not just human forces, but a multi-species fleet larger than any military formation in recorded galactic history. Ships from 100 different worlds trained together, sharing tactics and technologies that had never been combined before. But, perhaps most importantly, they shared something else: the knowledge that someone was finally willing to fight for them. The Zephyrian survivors, led by Navigation Master Keleth, became the Alliance's chief intelligence coordinators. The crystalline hives contributed their mastery of defensive technologies. The Void Dancers shared weapons that manipulated space and time itself. Even the Altrurians, who had maintained neutrality for millions of years, began providing strategic guidance and historical data about previous cycles. 2 years after the Battle of Tau Ceti, long-range sensors detected the return of the Harvester fleet. But this time, they brought more than 12 ships. Dozens of the massive vessels emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory, their dark hulls scarred with new modifications and upgrades. They had learned from their previous encounter. They had adapted. They had prepared. But so had the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the GDS Unity, the flagship of the largest military fleet ever assembled. Around her, representatives from 47 different species worked together at stations designed by the best minds of 100 worlds. In the space beyond, 3,000 ships waited in formation, ready to fight for something that none of them had possessed for millions of years: hope. "Admiral," reported Commander Hayes, now serving as her chief of staff, "we're receiving a transmission from the Harvester fleet." Sarah nodded. "Put it through." The same alien voice that had spoken to her 2 years earlier filled the bridge, but this time it carried different harmonics. Confidence, certainty, and, underneath it all, something that might have been anger. Species designation: human. Coalition designation: Galactic Defense Alliance. Previous tactical parameters have been analyzed. Counter-strategies have been developed. Harvesting operations will now resume. Resistance is futile. Sarah smiled. And in that smile was all the stubborn determination of a species that had been fighting impossible battles since it learned to make fire. Species designation: harvesters, she replied, using their own terminology against them. You hurt our friends. You destroyed civilizations that had done nothing wrong. You've been bullying this galaxy for millions of years. She paused, looking out at the massive fleet surrounding her, thinking of all the species that had come together because humanity had shown them that the monsters could bleed. Now it's time to learn what happens when someone fights back. The greatest battle in galactic history was about to begin, and, this time, the harvesters would learn that some debts could only be paid in blood.